What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Oh, she's a rowdy today. Today we're going to talk about what are the 5 most surprising things that I learned when I started riding a motorcycle. If you've ever started a new job, picked up a new hobby, or gotten into some other new kind of world that's just totally foreign to you, you know the sensation of being totally caught off guard, people saying things to you, maybe people wanting to come up and talk to you about things, hearing terms you might have never heard of. There's a very sharp and steep learning curve at the beginning of any of these new hobbies. And so we're going to talk about the 5 ones that were most surprising to me for riding a motorcycle. So I started riding in 2019, and my first bike was a 1999 BMW F650 ST that I picked up for $450. And the most surprising thing to me that I learned immediately was that I called up the dealership to get some service done to it because it was a bit rough of a bike, and they told me they don't work on bikes over 15 years old. And I had never heard of any concept like that before, because coming from the automotive world where I'd only owned cars my whole life, I could take my 1980 something Honda to a Honda dealership and they would work on it just fine. Same is true of any car dealer, right? Car dealerships, doesn't really matter the age, they'll work on the car. But the motorcycle dealership refused and said, we don't work on things over 15 years old. And to me, it's like, oh, wow, this is so surprising. Like, what do I do with this bike now? Now the BMW dealership won't even work on it. And so it was just totally foreign concept to me. Power sports is a different world in that way. It's a great incentive to learn to work on your stuff yourself, and buy tools and really get into the hobby more. Lean on fellow motorcyclists who do have tools, who do have some of these skills, because I found that super valuable. You know, at the time I didn't have the skills I needed to do that. I didn't have the time. I just needed someone to fix it for me so I could learn to ride. So very surprising first thing. Now, you might be tempted to blame dealerships and say, oh, dealerships, they just want you to buy a new bike, whatever. They might have good reasons for it. It might be that parts are harder to get, like OEM parts, and you can get aftermarket parts after a certain age. There might be legitimate reasons. So I'm not accusing dealerships of being bad or lazy or anything. I'm just saying it's inconvenient and something that very much surprised me as a new rider. So for motorcycles in general, new motorcycle warranties tend to be 3 years, 36,000 miles, something like that, maybe as an industry average you could call it. Some of them you can buy extended warranties, maybe go to 7 years. In my opinion, most motorcycles in the United States are used as weekend toys, though, where people just aren't using these every day. The miles are very low. I bought this bike 2015 model year. I bought it in 2023, at the very end of 2023, and it had less than 5,000 miles on it. People just tend not to use these as daily riders, daily drivers, commuters in America, and so for that reason, it's a little bit weird that it's like this bike could only have 5,000 miles, but if it's, you know, it's already 10 years old, so it only has 5 years left where they'll service it before you got to go find independent local mechanics to do anything you need on it, or you got to learn to do it yourself. Find a riding buddy who's good with some tools. So, first surprising thing, no dealership support. The second most surprising thing to me about learning to ride a motorcycle was wet clutches and just the mechanical general differences of a motorcycle. So if you come from the car world like I did, and you came from driving manual transmission cars, you're into sport cars maybe, and then you're like, you know what the pinnacle of performance is? Motorcycles. I'm gonna get a motorcycle. So with a car transmission, a manual transmission, people talk about don't ride the clutch, don't burn out the clutch, all this kind of stuff, right? They're very, you know, hesitant about you damaging the clutch in any way. And on a motorcycle, it's very different, and you learn this kind of in the MSF when they teach you to feather the clutch and try to make these sharp turns, right? but it's not really bad for a motorcycle clutch to ride the clutch a little bit at some low speed, try to make a maneuver, whereas in a car you wouldn't want to do that necessarily. And so the difference is a wet clutch versus a dry clutch, right? I don't know a ton about clutches, but I do know the difference is that a motorcycle clutch will be more forgiving with wearing. So when people first talked about revving it up and dumping the clutch to pop a wheelie, that sounded to me like you're going to be replacing a lot of clutches, which, you know, might be true if you're not good at doing it right. But it's not nearly as bad as you would think if you come from the automotive world. Another big difference was that you have to use an MA. I think it's like JASM or JSOMA. You're looking for the big MA on motorcycle oil to designate that it's got the friction modifiers and stuff that won't mess up the wet clutch. If you get a standard automotive oil, a lot of them will cause clutch slippage, right? Because they won't let the friction plates stick together in a wet clutch. So one big difference there mechanically. That was interesting to learn about. And then you also do chain maintenance quite frequently, especially if you're trying to do wheelies or hard acceleration. You'll just stretch that chain a little bit faster. You know, if you live down gravel roads or dirty roads, you're going to end up doing a lot more chain maintenance. So that's something totally foreign. When you use like a car with just differentials and stuff like that, maybe you change the differential oil or transmission oil, like, you know, thousands and thousands of miles, like maybe 70,000 miles you're doing it or something like that, 50,000 miles. With a motorcycle, you're just doing it all the time. Chain maintenance is constant life. And so you can get a drive shaft bike and stuff, but most commonly, and a lot of common motorcycles are using chains. So another weird difference to motorcycles, you also have to get valve intervals done a lot because they're such high revving engines compared to cars. A lot of cars will go, you know, 150,000 miles or more maybe before anyone thinks about doing a valve check on them. Motorcycles, a lot more analytical about their valves. They'll be wanting them, you know, 15 maybe to 30,000 miles, somewhere in that range. So it's a lot more maintenance intensive from that viewpoint. Along with the dry clutch versus wet clutch conversation, usually when you're driving a manual transmission car, you don't want to rev up the rev super high and be super slow to let out the clutch. And part of it is that a lot of gasoline cars might rev typically to like 6,000, maybe 7,000. If you come from the diesel world, you might only have an engine that revs like 3,000 or 4,000 RPM. On a motorcycle, they rev so much higher. And so to really get the power out of the engine, you gotta rev it. I mean, you know, this bike revs to 10,000 and it's a hoot the whole entire time. You should just enjoy it. There are plenty of engines that'll rev over 14,000 RPM. That's really where the power is on the bike. You know, sitting, cruising down the highway, you're going to be at a lot higher RPM. It's just something to get used to about the mechanical differences of these machines. One of the next differences I would describe as motorcycling being more of a subculture rather than a hobby. So hobbies you might think of as people who are like, yeah, they do it, but they don't really associate or socialize together. It's just like, yeah, that's cool, you do that, I do it too, but we do it separately. We don't really ever want to do it together. Motorcycling has a great subculture where the people are very cooperative in general, want to help you out. A lot of people want to socialize, they want to talk to you about your bike. The closest thing I can think of to it is a little bit more like Jeep culture. When I was a kid, I had a friend whose dad had a Jeep Wrangler, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. I was like, wow, every time he passes a Jeep, he knows that person. Like, they just know each other so well. This is incredible. And so it was pretty interesting to realize that it's like, that's just kind of the culture. They say hi to each other, they wave, they make nice gestures. We're gonna sneak through here and take some photos. But yeah, a lot like how the Jeep culture of waving to each other, being friendly towards each other, giving each other little ducks, I would describe the motorcycle culture as being fairly similar, where it's like, hey, we have something in common, we can bond over that, and I enjoy talking about it. So I found that the motorcycle culture, super supportive. If you're broken down on the side of the road, super likely to come down and stop next to you, try to help you out if you had something you need help with. Very, very cool culture. I know I stop for people all the time, just checking out, say, hey, how are you doing? Everything okay? So that's the culture. And the biggest part of the culture that people talk about and probably recognize is when motorcyclists pass each other and they give each other the little wave. So I came here just to get my shot of a thumbnail. We'll be right back. All right, we got our thumbnail ready to keep going. So along with that whole theme of the community, right, being a subculture, not just a hobby, the second part I'd call out, or I guess this would be the fourth on the list, would be riding just to ride. A lot of people just want to go out on a ride together. There's a whole, like, you know, Facebook communities and all this kind of stuff, trying to find people to ride with. And I feel like that's gone in a lot of ways from our culture. Maybe you want to say that just because gas prices or vehicles are expensive, or people spend so much time now just commuting, that who would want to spend more time in a car? But I think it's generally safe to say that a lot of people don't go for Sunday drive type of things anymore in their car. They just commute, they just get where they need to go. And that culture is kind of gone from what it used to be when I think of maybe like the 50s or 60s, people going out as a family for a Sunday drive. But in motorcycle culture, it's absolutely still a thing. Today, for example, I drove 7 hours for work in a truck, and now I'm back on this bike. To me, it's a totally different thing. Riding a motorcycle is relaxing and fun and thrilling and all sorts of different things. And that's just not how I really describe driving a car, right? Being in a car, it's a little bit more just like commuting. Maybe I'm working, maybe I'm doing whatever. I think cars are much more associated now with just utility, and motorcycles associated a little bit more with fun, at least in my mind. So that's a very different thing. I find myself all the time just wanting to go out and ride my motorcycle. I just want to go out to a twisty road. I just want to make a video. I just want to take some photos of it. I just want to go hang out with people who ride. I find tons of excuses just to get out and ride for really not a huge pragmatic reason, right? I could stay at home and, I don't know, like, learn something else or do something else. But to me, it's like, this is fun, this is exciting. I want to do this with my free time. And so it's very, very different from car culture. I know there is still a big enthusiast section of car culture, but I just think it's a little bit different, having come from like being a car enthusiast to being a motorcycle enthusiast. I enjoyed riding my daily driver to work and stuff, but I just didn't really have the desire or money to, like, let's just go put more miles on this thing after I already commute to work. And maybe if you have a remote job and stuff like that, it's different. But at least for me, I spent a long time commuting in a car I really loved. But it's just very different on a motorcycle. And the fifth and final thing, which is very appropriate, as I see these clouds approaching and as I notice a couple of wet spots appearing on the pavement back there, preparing for your ride. I will get on the road. I mean, today, 7 hours in a truck driving, didn't look once at the weather, didn't care about anything. You know, if it has oil in it and the temperature gauge isn't going crazy, just keep driving, right? No tire warning gauges, just go, right? It's much less stressful, or not stressful. It's much less of a checklist you want to do before hopping in a car and going for a drive. If you forget waters, or if you forget whatever, we'll stop. But on a motorcycle, it's a lot different. I prepare much more before I go out for a ride. I check weather. I look at maps, especially because I'll go far. I'll go, 2 hours in either direction in a day and spend the day out there and then want to come back. But I don't necessarily want to go there or back 2 hours of riding in the rain, or be there all day in the rain, right? Whereas in a car, I might be like, yeah, I don't care, I'm gonna go and I'll be inside. But with a motorcycle, I care more. And it's not necessarily saying I won't go, but it's just saying I'm going to prepare a lot better if I going on a motorcycle versus going in a car. I'm going to make sure I have high visibility stuff or rainproof stuff if I need. I'm going to dress more appropriately for the weather, right? If it's really hot out, I might wear a little bit less gear. If it's really cold, I'm going to wear way more gear and way more warm clothes than I ever would if I was driving in a car, right? The temperature can change every every quarter mile. If I all of a sudden go down into a lake, it can be way cooler down there in the lake. So much more preparation required as I drive with my blinker on. I'm much more analytical about maintenance on the bikes, the condition of the bikes, all sorts of things like that before I get out and go for a ride on a bike, and much less so on a car. And on motorcycles, I've been out for pretty long rides, and I've had things happen to me. I've had the front fender piece come loose on one bike. It's just like a bolt sort of like rattled out of it, or like the little plastic piece that it threads into snapped off. Something happened where it came loose. Pull over. Good thing I had zip ties. Just zip tie right back on, keep going home. Once I was going, I noticed a rattling from my exhaust, and it was the bolt had backed out a little bit, so it was starting to rattle. And there's just all sorts of little things where it's like you would never think like, oh, a bolt will back out, but on my Honda it did. And so there's just a lot more tooling preparation I want to have, of like tools with me, must-haves. Last year I got 3 flat tires, and every time I was able to limp myself home because I had a flat tire kit, right? With a car you might call AAA, or you might just have a spare tire, but with a motorcycle it's very different. You're not going to have a spare tire. You might have a spare tube, you're not going to have a spare tire probably, unless you're going around the world or something like some of these people. But tool preparation, gear preparation, weather preparation, so much more important on a motorcycle. Whether that's sun protection. If I'm going for a long ride, I'm going to probably have a water bladder in the backpack and a hose run up so I can drink as I go. It's just totally different considerations. I think of it sort of like, this is what, you know, the Boy Scouts want to be. I was never a Boy Scout, but I'm just like, you know, how they're like always prepared and stuff. It's like Boy Scouts must grow up to be great motorcyclists because they're always going to be prepared for what's ahead of them. And I think that's a great thing. So these are the top 5 things I learned when I was new to motorcycling. I'm curious, what are the things you learned? What did I miss that you think is worthwhile and helpful for new riders out there? And if you are a new rider, you know, let me know. What are the things that are really surprising to you, catching you off guard? Did this list help you at all? I hope it did. I will catch you all in the next video. Thanks for watching, and ride safe, everybody.